I got the unenviable job of being the anchor man for this. But in the time that we have left, I want to emphasize, I think, some practical recommendations based on some of the discussion we've had so far. I would say, first of all, I want to thank Tom and my colleagues for having this seminar. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. wrote the first great biography of Orestes Brownson in 1939 called The Pilgrim's Progress. And in the final chapter, he said that Orestes Brownson is largely unknown for a lot of different reasons. One, as he pointed out, was that in the 19th century, Catholicism was very unpopular in America, and that the fact that Brownson became a Roman Catholic excommunicated him from polite society and so many other areas. It's just a fact. It's just the reality. Our history in America is not necessarily one, as we all know, of religious or racial tolerance. That's just the truth. However, he was prophetic in so many ways. And what I thought one of Schlesinger's great paragraphs in the end of his book was that, in fact, if you read Orestes Brownson on so many different things, philosophy, theology, religion, literary criticism, political theory, he actually said, Schlesinger, as a social critic and as a philosopher, there was no American of the 19th century who was his equal. None. Schlesinger, the speechwriter for Jack Kennedy, one of the leading liberal historians of the 20th century. By the way, that book, The Pilgrim's Progress, became the foundation of Schlesinger's great work, The Age of Jackson, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. Anyway, as kind of the end game here for me, what I want to talk about is federalism, and I'm going to make some practical recommendations based on the vision of Orestes Brownson. And I will start out by saying that everybody in this room, every American, is heir to an innovative achievement in practical political science. Everybody in this room is a citizen who holds a unique dual citizenship, reflecting both the unity and the diversity of the American people. Every American is equally a citizen of the United States of America, the Great Republic, and a citizen of the state in which he has legal residence. Now, what does that mean? Well, on a practical level, it means that every elected official, federal or state, has a solemn duty to protect our rights as citizens of the United States, as federal citizens of the United States, but also as citizens of the states. Our relationship under the original Constitution, the relationship between the states and the federal government, is not a vertical relationship where the federal government's up here and the states are down below. The relationship in the original Constitution is a horizontal relationship. Under Article 6 of the federal Constitution, the national law is indeed supreme. But as Alexander Hamilton, probably the strongest nationalist at the Constitutional Convention, said, it is supreme within its own sphere of constitutional authority. Absorb that fact. It's not a vertical relationship. It's horizontal. Brownson emphasizes a major fact, and I think my colleagues, tried to elucidate this. Many Americans simply do not sufficiently appreciate our civic inheritance. I mean this. Throughout the entire course of the human history, the world never witnessed the adoption of a plan of self-government quite like the debate and deliberation leading to the adoption and ratification of the federal Constitution. Never happened. The Constitution of 1787 was the product of an extended private debate on constitutional details in Philadelphia by American society's most august citizens, who then humbly subjected their work to an even more intense, extensive, and often raucous popular debate and left the final decision in the hands of our citizens in specially called state conventions. So that great debate started top down, but it ended bottom up. In Europe, the political elites were astonished by this. We have written record on this, which is really quite rich. There's some wonderful books on the subject, but it was a marvel to many people overseas in France, Great Britain, Germany, Russia. That is what made the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 unique and the subsequent debates historic. That free, open, robust debate over the ratification of the Constitution, lasting for months, engaging Americans, the length and the breadth of the former colonies, was again the first such process of its kind. Orestes Brownson grasped that fact, and that insight became central to his own work in the elaboration of the American Constitution and the American Republic. That Constitution embodied two important facts: the unity of the American people and the diversity of the American people, what Richard Reinsch referred to as the unwritten Constitution. And Brownson writes, I think this is quite interesting, he says, America's written Constitution, the product of the Philadelphia Convention, is a true reflection of America's unwritten Constitution. Quote, "There is evidently a profound logic in the Constitution, and there is not a single provision in it that is arbitrary or anomalous or that does not harmonize dialectically with the whole and with the real Constitution of the American people." And then he goes on to say, the founders actually building on the unwritten Constitution, better, quote, better than they knew. The fundamental political tension of 1788 is actually not radically different from the fundamental political tensions of 2024. In 1788, the central issue in the former American colonies, the overriding fear of the anti-federalists is that the new Constitution would result in a concentration of power and the destruction of the independent political authority of the state. That threat actually remains today. For the founders, the concentration of power was almost universally recognized as a political evil. And the reason is that ultimately it would suppress personal, political, and economic liberty. Recall, once again, that the key charge against Britain's government leading up to the revolution in 1776 was that it was arbitrary government. The Declaration of Independence is, in fact, nothing more than a statement, a very elaborate statement of an attack, an indictment, a long indictment of arbitrary actions by the British Crown, and that arbitrary government was inherently tyrannical. In 2024, we're dealing actually with many of the same problems. The threat's taken a new form. It has been given a new life with the relentless rise of a huge, largely unaccountable system of regulatory and administrative control over millions of Americans' personal, economic, and even today, more so than ever before, their social lives through a very powerful administrative state. The internal conflicts intensify over fundamental moral and cultural issues, including the meaning and value of human life and even human sexuality. We have a Supreme Court justice asked a question under oath, "Please tell me what is a woman?" And she cannot answer the question. That was inconceivable not too long ago, right? Nobody ever thought that there would ever be a serious conversation about whether men could become pregnant. But that's the world in which we live. It's just an indication of the degree of intensity of our cultural conflicts, as well as the scope and the size of our fiscal obligations. Richard mentioned it, the massive entitlements that will impose huge pressures on current and future generations of taxpayers. Gen Z will not know what hit them. You saw the CBO report, right? You're all familiar with it. 2034, a $50 trillion national debt. Ponder it. Anyway, federalism was the constitutional remedy to balance these competing forces, the need for a strong and competent national government, and the desire to retain a strong and viable local government, and the political freedom to order and resolve our own local and domestic problems. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to get it right on federalism. This is something that is not abstract. This is not a political science issue. This is nothing to deal with political philosophy. It is something that deals with actually action in this building, in the House and in the Senate and in the White House. We've got to get this right. Too many of us don't. Various people use the same language and mean very, very different and contradictory things. Progressives, we've talked a lot about progressives, obviously acknowledge there are 50 states, 50 different states, but since the early 20th century, they do not view them the way the founders did, or even the way most American governors of the state see themselves today. What do I mean by that? I guess I mean that progressives then and now often view the states as obstacles to progress, or actual, on a positive level, actual or potential branch offices of the federal government. The most recent example of this on a massive scale was the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, what we call Obamacare, where the states are to become channels of federal regulatory power, basically agents of the Department of Health and Human Services. We have so-called state-based health insurance exchanges, which are really creations of the national government. The states have absolutely nothing to do with any of it. These are federal, not state, rules for health insurance. The states are supposed to cooperate and execute the rules and regulations daily churned out by the federal bureaucracy in Washington. Some of our conservative friends take a polar opposite extreme position. A few years ago, just mentioned this, I got an email from an irate conservative. They didn't like what I said about something. I don't know what it was exactly, but it was a few years ago. This probably was a Heritage Foundation donor because I'm at the Heritage Foundation. And he writes me angrily in an email, each of the 50 states is a nation state like France, Germany, or Spain, and not some sort of vague village, mini town, or township out in the countryside in North America or in the Pacific Ocean. Now, I get the writer's anger and frustration, but now, the states of New York, California, or Indiana do not have the same sovereign status as Britain, France, Russia, Spain, or Germany. I mean, this is insane. But it is not far removed from the political theory of the 19th century. On that crucial point, Orestes Brownson's insights were and are still very compelling. The question that Brownson wrestled with, and he argued that the founders actually did not wrestle with well enough, was the issue of sovereignty. Sovereignty is where the supreme power of the state actually rests. The sovereign is the supreme power of the state. Is the sovereign divisible? Well, many of the classical liberals who supported the Constitutional Convention said, well, yeah, sure, we'll divide sovereignty between the federal government and the state governments. That is to say that sovereignty is something that inheres in government. Well, it doesn't. The assumption must be, if you say, well, the states delegate the authority to the federal government, the assumption, must be that the principal, the individual state, somehow loans out its sovereignty to the agent, the national government, which is to act on its behalf. But logically, says Brownson, the agent is not and cannot logically be superior to the principal. So he concludes, any act of delegation freely given can also be freely withdrawn. Correct? It was John C. Calhoun, the brilliant John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, more than anyone else, who paved the theoretical path for state secession. The Constitution, in Calhoun's view, was nothing more than a compact among the states, as Calhoun held an agreement among sovereign states to deal with general and specific interests as they deemed proper. The states were sovereign. They themselves individually were the supreme units of the American political order. Before the compact, they were sovereign, and they were sovereign after the compact. But, as Brownson says, the sovereign states could only delegate the exercise of their sovereign powers, not the sovereign powers themselves. While Calhoun himself was no secessionist, state secession was nonetheless the logical conclusion to the premises of that argument. If a sovereign state equal in constitutional status with every other sovereign state can freely give consent, right? The principle of consent, then once again it can logically withdraw that consent. Nice, neat theoretical argument. The consequence of the argument, of course, was a sea of blood in 1861. None of this is old. None of it's old. The nature of a union has been a historical flashpoint of debate for as long as the country's been around throughout our history. It's gone back and forth. Brownson's argument about sovereignty is basic. The states, in fact, were not independently sovereign. They did not act as sovereigns. That is the historical reality. Brownson clarifies the truth, that sovereignty, the supreme power of government, was transferred from the British Crown to the people of the United States, or the people of the states united. There was no union outside of the states, and there was no states outside of the union. The fact is, the United States, born in war and revolution, was an organic unity from the beginning. The people of the states, United States, in fact, were people in the states united, not separate. The nation existed as a fact prior to the Constitution established in Philadelphia. And in this, Brownson stands squarely on the shoulders of General George Washington and the Supreme Court Justice John Jay. Washington, in his last circular letter of 1783 to the Army, writes, he declares that the United States has come into existence as a nation, and in his farewell to the Army, he urges the soldiers to think of themselves henceforth as, quote, citizens of the United States and not just Virginians or New Englanders. Likewise, John Jay clarifies the fact in Federalist 5, the reality of the United States on the world stage. Quote, to all general purposes, we have been uniformly one people, each individual citizen, everywhere enjoying the same national rights and national privileges and protections. As a nation, we have made peace and war. As a nation, we have vanquished our common enemies. As a nation, we have formed alliances and made treaties and entered into various compacts and conventions with foreign states. The Constitution is a beautiful thing. It sets clear limitations on the power of the federal government. You all know that. And the founder's vision was that the vast majority of subjects would be regulated by state law. The question is, what do we do now? Can I take a couple minutes? These are my recommendations based on my understanding of Orestes Brownson's great work. Orestes Brownson is not here to tell us what to do, but he did outline a vision which I think could be the foundation of policy. Brownson neatly summarizes the historical mission of the United States. He says, quote, this is the providential mission of America. Its idea is liberty indeed, but liberty with law and law with liberty. Yet its mission is not so much the realization of liberty as the realization of the true idea of the state, which secures at once the authority of the public and the freedom of the individual, the sovereignty of the people without social despotism, and individual freedom without anarchy. In other words, its mission is to bring out in its life the dialectic union of authority and liberty, of the natural rights of man and those of society. Now, what does that mean? Today, we are witnessing unthinkable transgressions against the constitutional order. Some have actually argued we're living in a post-constitutional age. You all know it, I'll just mention a few things. The refusal to enforce clear written immigration laws, the issuance of executive orders and dictates without any congressional authority backing them up, numerous and direct challenges to the legitimate authority of Congress to secure information what is necessary for Congress to continue or to fulfill its responsibility to exercise its legislative powers, violations of the First Amendment, violations of the Second Amendment, the Due Process Clause, among so many other things. We are in a deadly serious situation. And so what do we do? Well, first and foremost, and I don't know how many people are congressional staff here, but this would be directed to you and your boss. Take the oath to uphold the federal Constitution seriously. What does that mean? It's not as easy as it sounds. As a practical matter, it means that one should simply refuse to enact anything that is not clearly justifiable under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Period. As a matter of fact, what I'm suggesting is that Congress visibly reframe the debates on practical matters and measures within the confines of their constitutional responsibilities. Their constitutional responsibilities to interpret and apply the law. I heard one, I'm not going to mention his name, one member of the House in a hearing not too long ago say, well, look, this is a constitutional question. The courts will decide that. No. Constitutional interpretation has never been intended by the founders to be the exclusive prerogative of the courts. And anyone who says otherwise is simply ignorant. It's not a debatable matter. It's a hard task. I don't make light of it. Sometimes the determinations of what is or should be a matter for the general government is not always a simple question, but it's a question that must always be asked because one either upholds the Constitution or takes the oath to uphold the Constitution seriously, or one does not. Lawgivers are not technocrats. Congressional staff are not merely cogs in some legislative machine. They're called upon to think and think seriously about their responsibilities. I think sometimes the most serious failure is simply not to think about it at all. Secondly, members of Congress should actively cooperate with state legislatures on common concerns. Start working closely and cooperatively with state legislators back home on issues of domestic policy, energy, education, health, environmental policy, tax policy, whatever. For House members, it may very well mean regular correspondence or meetings with state legislators who have similar responsibilities in their own committee assignments in the state capitals. Whatever area of public policy today could be handled or should be devolved to the states rather than retained at the federal level, that should be an active conversation. Ronald Reagan, by the way, proffered rather dramatic devolutionary initiatives, returning power to the states. So did Bill Clinton, by the way, in some areas. So that would be a good thing, to start that conversation. With a shift of public responsibility, you have a shift in public debate. Since local government closest to the people, is the most democratic, as Jefferson argued very strenuously, the power shift would revitalize democratic debate at the local level where it is most important. Here's another one. Make senators directly accountable to the states. The 17th Amendment certainly changed the way in which senators are appointed. A number of founders initially favored the Senate as a kind of a powerful Senate modeled on the Roman system with powers of appointment and budgetary powers and treaty powers. But one thing is the Senate was to be the ultimate federal institution in Washington. The senators were to represent the states. One way the states could actually do this is to make the senators more directly accountable, is to have the senators, to require the senators, to ask the senators to give an account of their stewardship of state interest at the beginning of every legislative session. It could take the form of an annual address to the state legislature at the beginning of their sessions, use forums to outline an agenda for representing the state in Washington, consulting with state elected representatives on matters of direct concern to the state. Point is, they are state representatives. They don't represent some mass, and we should start requiring them to act that way. Sue Washington when Washington gets out of the way. That's already happening. Put federal officials in the hot seat at the state level as well as the federal level. Here's my idea. In number 28 of the Federalist, Alexander Hamilton writes, projects of national usurpation, I love the line, will be detected by state legislatures at the distance, and possessing all of the organs of civil power and the confidence of their people, they can adopt a regular plan of opposition. Well, here's one. Department of Commerce, Department of Health and Human Services, whatever. Want to issue a rule or regulation? Fine, that's great. Let them come down to Indianapolis or, Alabama or Annapolis, Maryland, and defend it. Now, state legislators can invite them. They might not come, but you would have a written record, and their invisibility would be a glaring obvious thing. So that's something that I've been thinking about. Work cooperatively with other states. I could go into great detail on that, but I'm running short on time. I will say this. Because Washington's challenges to state authority is so extensive, I would hope that we would see the institutionalization of some kind of a red state coalition to coordinate both a public relations and a common policy response to the excesses of Washington. During the Trump administration, blue states like California routinely challenged the administration on a whole variety of issues. Red states should be encouraged to do the same and formalize their opposition through a new organization dedicated to that purpose. The groundwork for red state coalition's already been laid. I mean, it's already happening in many respects. In 2012, 26 states challenged the Affordable Care Act before the US Supreme Court, and they scored a mixed success. They rolled back a massive expansion of Medicaid because it was unconstitutional. Well, anyway, 26 states getting together and doing something like that makes a lot of sense. The point is, the country is deeply polarized, and there's a world of difference between the citizens of the blue states and the red states. Vermonters do not see the world the same way as people in South Carolina. Texas and California, I've been to both, they might as well be on different planets. I mean, really true. But the source of the polarization, we are actually more diverse than ever. But the source of our polarization is not just one issue, like it was slavery, basically, but a whole wide range of issues. As I said earlier, moral, cultural, political, economic. Right now, too many Americans just simply don't like each other. And that's going to continue for some time. The last time we had such a polarization back in the 1850s, the result was catastrophic. We have to learn, however, to live with one another, but the only way that can happen is if we refrain from using federal power as a sledgehammer of coercion and conformity on a wide variety of public policy questions where we cannot and will not come to an agreement. The original Constitution gives us a way out. We need to live and let live, and the best way to do that is to revive the federalism that the founders gave us and that Orestes Brownson defended so valiantly in the midst of the Civil War when he lost two of his own precious sons in defense of the Union. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I do want to announce that American Family Project, in order to promote the Brownsonian scholarship, is working on a program to have a Orestes Brownson senior thesis competition. And we have about 25 academics around the country who are sympathetic to this idea. So I think we will be able to reach a good number of students, even in our first year. We'll be working this out. We'll be ready to announce it sometime in early fall. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope this was helpful for all of you. It was certainly helpful for me. Thank you.